A couple of days ago at GDC, Epic Games announced that they were releasing Unreal Engine version 5.4 preview on the Epic Games launcher. And for those of you who saw my 5.4 development build video, you know that this is packed full with some really awesome audio features. Now, I'm not going to lie, I was a little disappointed at how little they talked about audio in the Unreal Engine showcase, but that's what I'm here for. So we're going to dive in and we're going to take a look first at getting started with setting up Midi. Now, I'll be honest, I could probably ramble on for hours about using Midi inside Unreal Engine, but I promise this is just a starter guide, so I'm going to try and keep it really short. So let's hop over into Unreal Engine. And just like with most new features, we do have to come into our settings and go into plugins. Now, this is just a little bit different. If you start typing Midi in here, you're going to see MIDI device support and remote control protocol MIDI. These are things that have been in Unreal Engine for quite a while now. What we're actually looking for to get with the 5.4 features is we're actually going to look for harmonics. Now, I do already have this installed, but chances are if you're doing this for the first time, like normal, you will need to enable this. You'll get a pop-up at the bottom telling you to restart the engine, and then you'll do so. Now, just like my 5.4 development build, this comes with a very similar warning. This is a preview build, so while it is available to the public, that doesn't mean that it's market ready yet. So even though there have been some updates from the development build video to the preview video that we're doing now, there's still potential for things to change before 5.4 is fully openly released. So let's go ahead and take a look here. Now we've got the Harmonics plugin installed. And if we come over to our content browser, you'll see that I do have a MIDI file already imported. We're just going to be using for release, just like I did in the development build video. But I'm going to build this out from scratch so you can actually see what's happening here. So we're going to go ahead and start just like we typically do in most of my videos. And we're going to start by creating a MetaSound source. And I'm just going to call this MSS_MIDI. And we're going to go ahead and open this up. Now I'm going to move my content browser back out of the way. And one of the new features in 5.4 is these extra views. You know, you've got your regular audio meter, you've got your spectrogram view, your stereo field, and your frequency analysis. If you watched my development build video, you saw me talk about those already. So what we're going to do is, one of the new features that we have is a MIDI player. Now, if you don't see this in your list, then chances are you did not enable the Harmonics plugin. This will not show up in your context menu here until you do. Now, you'll notice with the MIDI player node, we can't just drag this into anything and start playing. That's because we also have a new node called the transport node. So we're going to go trigger to music transport. And if we do it this way, by default, it goes to prepare, which causes receiving nodes to prepare for playing. We're actually going to take this and we're just going to go right into the play. Now we do have some other features here. Pause, continue, stop, kill, trigger seek. I'm not really going to be diving into those in this video. They're pretty self-explanatory if you're familiar with MIDI. And so, you know, play, pause, stop, those are normal transport controls. Kill is essentially, if you are familiar with working with MIDI, this would be the same as your all notes off. And basically, sometimes MIDI notes can get stuck And what this does is it just kills everything. So we're going to go ahead now and take this transport and we can connect it over to here. Now, I'm not entirely sure if these pins are going to change or if they're just placeholders. So that'll be something to be seen, once we get into the official version of 5.4. But for right now, it doesn't matter. They work. And so, like I said, I did have our for release MIDI file, and I can go ahead and drop that in here. And what we're going to do is from our MIDI stream, we're going to go into another new node called the Fusion Sampler. Now we do have a mono and stereo version. I'm just going to use the mono for now. And if we connect this over to our audio out and I hit play, you're still not going to hear anything. Because one of the cool things about this Fusion Sampler is it has patches. And what these patches are essentially sample packs. They're different instruments. Now, we're using for release, so we'll go ahead and pick our piano sample. And now if we hit play, and we can hear that it works. This is going to be your absolute basic MIDI player to sampler setup. So our play, we're going into our transport and telling our transport to play. We're running our stream into the sampler and the audio from our sampler out. Now, you'll notice if you're familiar with the for release piano piece, we only heard the right hand. And that's because this particular MIDI track does have two tracks. So it has track 1 is the right hand and track 2 is our left hand. So what I'm going to do is I can go ahead and copy and paste this out. I'm going to switch this to 2. And we can run that same MIDI stream to multiple samplers. So let's say, for example, I wanted the right hand to be on piano and I wanted the left hand to be on a horn for some reason. We can absolutely do that. So we'll go ahead and grab a mono mixer here and connect these up. This is probably something you've done 100 times at this point. And so now we're going to hear our left and right hand together, but our right hand's going to be piano and our left hand is going to be horns. Now, obviously, it doesn't sound right because we're just goofing around. But it's just showing you that, if you have multiple tracks and multiple different types of instruments, you can absolutely use these different patches. Now, one thing I will say is those patches are actually in the engine content. So if I type in piano, we do have this pack. Now, at the time of recording this, I don't currently know a way to create your own. It's possible that I may have overlooked something. It's also possible that because this is a preview build, that's not something that's quite yet implemented. But if you want to kind of see the details panel, like I mentioned, you will have to go into the engine folder and not your normal content folder. But hopefully that's something that is coming our way. I think it would be really interesting if we could make our own instruments and our own sample packs. That would be great for marketplace content. If you're making a bunch of different VST, essentially like VSTs, that we can start making for the marketplace. I think that would be really cool. Another really interesting thing with the MIDI player being inside of a MetaSound, that means we also still have access to our MetaSound output watching. And so if we wanted, we can get rid of these. And we can also filter. We can filter by MIDI channel, MIDI note, and the stream track filter. But let's say we want to use that MIDI note filter. We can actually say we only want things to happen when note 60 plays. We can filter everything out by that MIDI note, and then we can come in here and type trigger and grab a MIDI note trigger. And we can promote these to outputs. And so now that these are outputs, if I wanted to, I could go into my level blueprint, or I can create a custom blueprint specifically for it and trigger things based on the MIDI note on, MIDI note off, or any of the other filters like the control channel and things like that. And so now what we can do is, if you wanted to, you can actually have a WAV file playing, and you can create a custom MIDI track synced to it. And instead of using that MIDI track to run a sampler, you can actually use it to drive in-game things. Now let's take a look at another new feature that is coming with 5.4, but still related to MIDI and specifically the harmonics plugin. So if we right click and we go to audio, you will see this new submenu here called harmonics, and inside has a MIDI step sequencer. So I'll call this MIDI SS. I don't know what to prefix this with really, but that's what we'll call it for now. And if we open this up, you're gonna see this window, and there's a couple really interesting things with this window. So we can have multiple pages if we want. We can have multiple rows and multiple columns, and with all these rows, by default you'll see that the note number is 60 and velocity is 120. But we can actually come in here and change this. It does have a range between 0 and 127, just like MIDI. And so say if we wanted 60, and I'll just do a chromatic scale right here. So 62. So we got MIDI notes 60 through 67. I'm just going to keep our velocity all at 120. And what this now allows us to do is a very basic step sequencer. So I can go ahead and just click notes as I want. And I can do them in a row, or if the previous one is already set as enabled, I can then click on this one again. It's going to turn kind of this mustard yellow color. And now we basically got it holding. And so now if I were to play this, it would play this note and then hold it until the end of this column. And while this is really neat, you're probably wondering, well, how the hell do I use it? And that's when we're going to go back over to our MetaSound. So in addition to having a MIDI player, we also have a step sequence player. And we can use the same transport just like we did before. And I'm going to go ahead and grab this new step sequencer that I made. And we can still run this into a sampler, just like we did with a regular MIDI file. And again, just for sake of the demo, we're going to do piano, and we can run this out here. Now this seems like it should work, but again, if we hit play, we don't hear anything. And that's because when we were using the MIDI player, it was getting the MIDI clock information from the MIDI file. But if you notice, there is no spot here for tempo. And so what we're going to have to do is create a MIDI clock. Now we can use a MIDI player. So, if we want to use the MIDI information from an already existing MIDI file, we can. But if you don't have one of those available, we can use this metronome MIDI clock generator. Now this does also need to be connected to the transport, which makes sense because we need to be able to sync this up. And we've got plenty of metronome options here. So we can set our time signature, we can set our tempo, we can set our speed. So for example, say we wanted it 120, but we want it to play back faster, we can set this to 2. If you're gonna change the speed, I will call out this MIDI clock speed affects pitch. So with that turned off, if say you have a piece that's in the key of C, it'll stay in the key of C regardless of how fast you go. Otherwise, with this ticked, which it is by default, then you are going to get a pitch shift when you change the speed. You won't get a pitch shift if you change the tempo, but just the speed. And so we'll keep that at 120. And now if I hit play, you can see that it's now playing this. And one of the things that is interesting about this, if you're working with like a MIDI file that you've custom created, you may need to be jumping back and forth between your DAW and Unreal Engine. Whereas with this step sequencer, let's say I wanted to change this and make it play chords. I can do it right here. I don't have to leave the engine. And it will just work. But the fun doesn't stop there when it comes to the MIDI step sequencer. One of the things that this step sequencer can do that you can't do with a regular MIDI file is you can actually change this at runtime. So I emptied out all the cells. I did keep the 61 through 70 and our 120 velocity. And so I'm going to come in here to our level blueprint, and you can do this in a custom blueprint if you want. That's totally fine. But just for the sake of this tutorial, I'm going to do it inside the level blueprint. Now on event begin play, I do want to add our audio component. And that's just going to be this MSS_MIDI MetaSound. And we're just going to throw it inside the details panel of that audio component. And that's all we need to do to initialize it. But now what we're going to do is we're going to come down to variable, and I'm going to call this just MIDI step. And you'll see that the variable type is already set to the MIDI step sequencer. And that's just because I was playing around with it earlier. Chances are, if you're doing it for the first time, yours will probably default to Boolean, or, if you've created other variables. But all you have to do is change the variable type to MIDI step sequencer. And then when you hit compile, over here on the right, you'll now see a drop-down menu where we can select that, or we can just drag it in from our content folder. And so we're going to come out here and we're going to get it. And what I want to do is I want to basically create that same chord that I was playing around with earlier. I'm going to start just by doing these first three. I'm going to go ahead and clear this back out so that we're sure it's empty. And if we type in cell, we can set the cell. Now, one of the things that I do want to point out, and I don't know, again, if this will change, but inside our step sequencer, you'll notice that we start on row 1. And why is that important? And that's because typically in Unreal Engine, when you're dealing with like indexes and arrays and things, it always starts on 0. And with this node, that is true. So keep in mind currently in the preview build, I do not know if this is going to change later. If it says 0 in the row here in this cell, it's referring to row 1 in your step sequencer. So even though this is row 1, I need row 0, row 2, and row 7. So we can keep that 0, copy and paste this out, make that 2, and again, 7. And we do want these states to be enabled, because if they're off, you know, that's gonna not turn it on. And we're just gonna drag our target down here. Now I do already have a trigger box set up. So I'm gonna call a reference to on actor begin overlap. And you can only connect this execute pin to 1 at a time. So what you'll have to do is just kind of daisy chain them together. And what I also want to do, I'm going to copy this and paste it over here. And we'll get our on actor end overlap. And we'll turn these off. So when the player enters the trigger box, it'll enable those 3 cells, and when we leave it, it'll disable it. Go ahead and hit play. We don't hear anything, but that audio component is active now. And if we walk up here to our trigger box, we can hear that those notes are now in our step sequencer. And now that I've left, they're disabled. And so I'm actually going to split this here because, like I said, it happens at runtime. So as I enter this trigger box, watch those cells. So it's not currently playing anything because those cells are empty. And now as soon as I walk in here, you can see that those cells have now lit up, and when I exit that trigger box, they turn off. And so while this was a very, very basic setup, you can definitely go crazy with this, and you can do different triggers within your level that may set up different orchestrations. If you're using a bunch of these, if I'm being honest, don't daisy chain them like this. Use like a for loop and create indexed arrays for these. That's gonna save you a lot of spaghetti inside your blueprint. But if you notice with these set cell, if we were inside here and I clicked on this, like I mentioned before, you can hold these out. And so this is a continuation. So the way that we do that is we're going to set the cell, and the continuation is a completely different node. So like I said, don't do this, but just for the sake of the tutorial, I'm going to. And so now we want to stay on row 1, or yeah, row 1, because it's row 0 in the node. And you do column 1. And I can run this all the way down and do column 2. And we want those to be enabled as well. So again, I'll split the difference here so that you can see. So we'll go ahead and hit play. And run into our trigger box again. And so now you can see over here, we've got that first cell, and then we've got our continuations. So you can interact with this completely all from your blueprint. And there are other nodes as well with this. Like if you wanted to add pages, you can toggle cell on a page, because if we do, say we do 2 pages, this would be row 0, cell 0 on page 1. But if we go to page 2, this is still row 0, cell 0, or row column 0. You get what I'm trying to say. So you will need to identify which page if you're using multiple pages. But we can also set the number of rows. We can do the same thing with columns. We can adjust the note number and the note velocity. So this MIDI step sequencer, while it can go from being really simple to a little crazy, is completely customizable all at runtime. Now, one of the things that I did notice, and I don't know if this is just something that is in the preview build, or if this is going to continue through into the final production, just something to keep in mind, because we're adjusting this at runtime. If I exit the game, this stays here. So now if I play it again, even though I haven't walked into that trigger box, it's still playing. So if this is the way that it's going to continue to be, I would definitely work into your workflow, making sure that whatever the player turns on, you have a way to turn it back off. Otherwise, you may run into issues with that. All right, guys, so that is going to wrap things up for this video. If I'm being completely honest, the ability to add and implement MIDI files natively is probably the biggest update for 5.4 for me personally. And there's still a ton of nodes that we can go over. There's still a lot of different pins that we can connect and start diving deeper into that. But because this is still a preview build, I don't want to dive too deep into it, because like I said, it is possible for things to change between now and when the full 5.4 version is released. But I at least want to get you guys in, get you familiar with kind of how things function so you can start creating. And if you do create something really awesome, I would absolutely love to see it. So you're more than welcome to join the Sound Effects Guy Discord server. You will find a link in the description below. And make sure you hit that subscribe button along with the notification bell so you don't miss out on any future content. Until next time.